Hi Dygmates, and welcome to another Dygma News. Today we have great news. We've started shipping the first 100 Dygma Defy keyboards, and some are already in their new homes. The first reports are very positive, but it could well be just the sheer emotion of receiving something you've waited for so long. If you want to keep up to date with their first impressions, head over to our Discord and Reddit where they're sharing them live. And that's it. Tune in next week for... I got more news for you, including an update on the ETA for mass production and the new Bazecor 1.3.1, which adds battery management features for the Dygma Defy. Let's start with the new Bazecor 1.3.1. Last week, we released a new version of Bazecor, our configurator software. It includes several general improvements and new features for the Dygma Defy. Besides some bug fixing, the biggest thing is that we've rebased the app builder from Electron Builder to Electron Forge, as the former was no longer supported. We also cleaned the code and updated a lot of packages, so Bazecor should now be faster and more stable. There are also some quality of life improvements for everybody. We have a new cloud-based firmware update process. The firmware is no longer attached to the software, which means we can roll out firmware updates without releasing new software versions. The UI is now responsive. Before, if you had a 4K screen, everything was tiny. And we've improved language support by adding Finnish, Korean, and Yurki. Thanks, JRE Klund. But I'm sure you're all eager to know the new features for the Dygma Defy. The most important is the new firmware update process, specific for the Defy. As it has more chips, it includes a more detailed step-by-step process. There's also a new wireless section where you can see the connection status, the battery levels, and energy saving mode, and some RF settings. We want more advanced energy management options ready when mass production ships, but at least this adds the basics. We have also added a quick battery menu at the bottom left corner. When you hover over it, you can see your battery levels. But having to open Bazecor to see your battery level is not optimal. So we've added a battery status key that you can add to your keyboard. When you press it, it'll show the battery level of the keyboard or if it's charging. One red LED means less than 10%, one green LED means less than 40%, two means between 40 and 70%, and three means above 70%. When you're charging, the lights will pulse green in a sequence. Finally, we're working on implementing how to switch between different Bluetooth devices soon. You can only have one at a time now, so we've added a reset key to disconnect and connect to various devices. Okay, so the software is progressing steadily. Now to the meat of the matter: mass production. After solving the problem with the PCB testing and validation bottleneck, we're now happily assembling the top block of the keyboard. That's the top panel with the key scanner PCB and the switches. At the time of recording this video, last Wednesday, we have about 2,000 ready. So our supply chain manager, Aitor, continued in his quest to make sure all suppliers met their deadlines and the quality standards. He found 3 different dragons to fight. The first quest had to do with the palm pads. The first batch arrived at our assembly factory, and when we did our incoming quality control, 80% failed. Most had glue stains on the surface and others had imperfections in the seams. So we rejected them all. When you get such a terrible acceptance ratio, you must reassess how the product is manufactured. You can't just throw away 4 out of the 5 that you make. So we redesigned the mold again to have a slightly taller side wall, about 1 millimeter. And now the silicone pad is stuck to the base of the palm pad with industrial double-sided tape instead of glue. We've had to wait to make a sample and test it. It stayed at a chamber for 3 days where the temperature fluctuated from 60 degrees to minus 30 degrees Celsius. But now we're back to production. Fortunately, the palm pads are added to the keyboard during fulfillment. So we had some leeway and this won't affect the timeline. But our hearts can only cope with so many of these surprises, and more were on the way. The tenting legs. This one is my personal favorite. The aluminum tenting legs for the Defy were supposed to be delivered during the last week of July. When we went to the factory to do a quick check, none of them were finished. To be fair, all the aluminum parts were done, but they hadn't glued the anti-slip tip. They said that we didn't have to worry, that they would do that with a machine and output thousands in a day. You can see where this is going, right? It turned out that the machine couldn't stick the anti-slip properly, and now they had to do it all by hand. So instead of thousands, they could only do 120 sets a day. And you need 2 sets per keyboard. So once again, we sat down with them to find a solution, which ultimately came down to asking a nearby factory for more trained workers. The timeline will be tight. We'll receive the legs in batches instead of all at the same time. But at least we dodged a fatal bullet. On to the next one, the base. This is a funny one. The base is one of the things that worried us the least because it's the same supplier that does the assembly, but it might be the part that actually affects the timeline. Our supplier decided to fix some imperfections in the mold that were causing little anomalies in the plastic. And it turned out that removing some of those anomalies, specifically the ones around the tenting hinges, made those tenting legs loose. So again, we retooled the mold to fix it, tested it, and went back to production. But over a week was lost. It's not a tragedy because we've continued assembling top blocks. However, we wanted to have about 1,000 keyboards ready to ship to Spain by next week, and instead we'll have 2,000 by the end of the week after. But don't reach for your torches and pitchforks just yet. We've been working on a special project for the last couple of months that will be ready in time to save the day. The new fulfillment. Since the inception of Dygma, quality control has always been one of our top priorities. At first, we didn't have enough manpower to have someone in China to oversee production all the time, and that led to many quality issues. Our solution? Ship the keyboards to Spain and do quality control and final fulfillment here. When the pandemic hit, being able to ship from Spain actually saved us. We could continue manufacturing remotely as we could check and validate the product here. But in itself, the system is inefficient. We have to ship the keyboards to Spain, which can take up to 2 months by sea, and then ship them worldwide. Also, when we find imperfections here in Spain, we often don't have the tools, parts, or knowledge to correct them. Also, our fulfillment center here has less capacity. Even if we hire extra people, there's just limited space. So it takes longer to fulfill big batches like the Defy mass production. Shipping the keyboards from where we make them would be better, using the assembly factory's knowledge, workforce, and facilities. Ideally, we would manufacture in Spain or Europe, but if you've watched our Why is Everything Made in China video, you'll know that it's not feasible for complex electronics like our keyboards. You can do some things like PCB assembly and some mechanical parts, but there's not a robust ecosystem in place yet. Now that we've grown and our product and operations team has quadrupled, including our beloved supply chain manager Aitor, we can have someone always in China to oversee production and fulfillment all the time. So instead of shipping the products here to Spain, we'll have a quality control and fulfillment line in our assembly factory in China. Jairo, our chief of operations, will fly there next week to set it all up, and he'll stay a few weeks until everything is running smoothly and we're shipping keyboards steadily. And as we said, we'll always have someone on the ground to keep quality control in check. We plan to do that for all non-European customers. For those in Europe, we'll still ship the keyboards to Spain. Since there are so many keyboard variations, it's best to do the final fulfillment here. That way, we'll also ensure that Europeans don't have to pay import taxes. For the rest of the world, it doesn't matter if it ships from Spain or China because it's an import anyway. So, what about the timeline? The good news is that with this new approach, we have shaved the time it takes for the keyboards to go to Spain, and we can also fulfill faster. We plan to air freight the first runs, which would have taken 2 or 3 weeks. Leaving some breathing room in case things don't go as planned, the first keyboards will start shipping during the last week of August instead of early September. Yes, you heard right. The ETA has not been delayed, but advanced. And with that good note, let's call it a day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. You don't want to miss when we announce that the Dygma Defy keyboards are finally shipping. And now, breaking news! Woman falls off chair and is suing Ergonomics for $69,420. Ecosystem, including our beloved supply, will have a quality control